one of the stories that our culture tells us is that any opinion, any belief is really just, an idea that somebody has. It's got no truth. There's no sort of objective reality to the things that we think. I might think that it's wrong to drive up to Durham in the middle of lockdown and go and live on a second home somewhere. But really, there's no sort of ultimate moral truth to that. It's just, what I think or what you think. And that's sort of the way that our society is increasingly set up now. But not just that, of course. It's not just that there's only opinion, there's no truth. But we tend to think a bit suspiciously now. So when I give my opinion, not only is it sort of just my opinion, but we also tend to think it's a bit of a power grab. So the reason why I'm saying that this is right or this is wrong is really because I want some sort of outcome that's going to benefit me. So, if I think it's wrong to drive up to Durham, maybe that's because I've got some sort of vested interest in nobody visiting Durham. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's a silly example, but we always tend to think there's a power grab going on behind the scenes. And if you think that's a bit extreme, then I'd encourage you to just reflect a bit on our political rhetoric over the last, however long you want to think, really, last decade at least. Every time there's an election, every time there's a referendum, the rhetoric is always around, like, what's best for you? I distinctly remember in the Brexit debate, somebody coming round to my house, knocking on the door and trying to convince me to vote to take our country in or out of Europe purely on my personal economic gain. And I just thought, how have we got here that huge political decisions we're being encouraged to make just on the basis of what's good for me? Whenever there's a budget now, the first thing the BBC does is whack up a calculator that says, work out how the budget affects you. In every manifesto I see, there's always the claim of this will benefit you, so you should vote for us. Manifestos, TV appearances, sort of dominated really by this talk about what, you, the consumer, can get out of this. Oh, whoops, I mean the citizen, you, the citizen, or no, actually, I mean the consumer. And, if you've seen my previous videos about liberalism, if you've listened to the podcast, hopefully you'll see that this isn't some sort of accident. This isn't random. This is just the working out of the liberalist philosophy, really, that, there's no common goals to fight for. We just have our own agendas, and all we can do is negotiate our own agendas. And that's what we see going on now. The philosophy of liberalism is producing itself in our behaviour. But in Christianity, in our worldview, shared goals are possible. We have a different perspective. We believe that we were created as good creatures. And I just want to share with you a couple of quotes I found really helpful. The theologian John Webster, he says this: "It is a consequence of Christian teaching about God and creation to say that peace is the natural order of creatures. Peace remains as basic as life itself." Or if we go back in time 1500 years before John Webster, we find Augustine saying this: "There may be life without pain, while there cannot be pain without some kind of life. So there may be peace without war, but there cannot be war without some kind of peace." So this sort of liberalist claim that we're fundamentally at war with one another, I think we have to reject that as Christians and say no. Fundamentally, what more basic than war is peace. And therefore we reject this kind of reducing everything down to me versus you. And instead we pursue the common good. We work with others, we discuss and we agree shared goals, we develop relationships where we can agree on the destination. And of course the doctrine of sin means that we're always going to be imperfect, our efforts are always going to be provisional, we're going to get this wrong. Until Jesus returns, it's going to need working on, but that doesn't mean that we give up working for the common good. It doesn't mean that this is impossible or futile. And on the contrary, I think being salt and light, seeking the kingdom of God, means working for the common good now. But I know that this can sound a bit sunny. We may think, that's great, Tim, that sounds very optimistic, but have you not seen people? Have you not seen society? And I think that's why we have to talk about eschatology. We have to talk about what we believe about the end of history. And, the Christian worldview would say, to what extent do we work for the common good, and to what extent do we sit at home and wait for the resurrection? Well, what we believe is that the kingdom of God is both now and not yet. And we have to hold on to both of those. So the kingdom of God was partially present in Israel. And then when Jesus came, the kingdom of God expands beyond Israel in a fresh way. And it continues to grow. And the kingdom of God continues to grow everywhere that God's will is done. But crucially, the kingdom of God is not fully here until Jesus comes again. We live between the times. We live in God's kingdom, but not in the fullness of God's kingdom. God's kingdom is increasing, but it's not yet here. It's inaugurated, if you want a good theological word for it. It's inaugurated, it's present now, but it's also not yet. And I think what this means for us is that we have to live into it now. Paul says in Galatians, seek the good of all men. We have to pursue the common good now. And we have to love our neighbours as ourselves. And we have to refuse the temptation to retreat away from culture, because we think that there are things we can pursue together, even in our fallen condition. But do we expect the fullness? No. Do we ever expect a sort of untarnished success? Of course we don't, But real discussions about shared goals and positive change is possible. And, this is about returning to our created nature. This is possible because this is who, as humans, we most truly are. And yes, we expect this to come more in the church. Of course we do. The church should be the place where everybody is given over personally to the kingdom of God. So we should expect a fuller agreement about our goals and values in the church. But we should also expect it in the world. Wherever we're salt and light, wherever we pursue the common good, we should expect to see something of the kingdom of God being brought by his followers as we pursue the common good and shared goals. And I think as we do that, if we do that, we join a very long list of Christian heroes, don't we? We think of Wilberforce. Not everyone who joined the abolition movement was a Christian. But he was able to articulate common goals and a shared vision and change society for the better. And that's quite a big example, but there are many other smaller ones as well. And maybe that's something to look into if you need a bit of inspiration. But I would argue that, Christianity is responsible for almost all the sort of positive goals we hold as a society. So I hope this video has maybe just helped you to think a little bit more through why as Christians we can pursue the common good and the qualified hope that we have for doing so. If you want to talk more, join me on a Zoom and it'd be great to talk it through.